I still hear his voice in my dreams. Not loud, never loud, but quiet, urgent, like he was afraid the walls themselves might be listening. You need to leave her, now. Those 5 words, spoken by a man I'd met only 20 minutes earlier, shattered the life I thought I was living. I stood there in the sterile hallway of Westridge Maternity Center, my palms slick against the crumpled ultrasound consent form, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack a rib. Just moments before, I'd been smiling at my wife through the glass partition, watching her laugh as the technician moved the wand over her belly. She looked radiant, peaceful, the picture of everything we'd prayed for after 2 years of trying. But then Dr. Evans had gestured me out, his face grim, eyes darting like he expected someone to stop him. He didn't say congratulations, he didn't say it's a boy or everything looks healthy. He leaned in, close enough I could smell the antiseptic on his scrubs, and whispered those words that turned my world inside out. What I saw on that screen wasn't just a baby, it was a lie that had been growing inside my wife for months. And as I stood frozen in that hallway, the cheerful murmur of expectant parents echoing around me, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even begin to understand how the woman I loved more than anything could be hiding something so dark, so deliberate, that a stranger would tell me to run before I even knew what I was running from. For 3 years, our life felt like something out of a storybook, the kind people read and sigh wistfully over, wondering if love like that really exists. We lived in a little craftsman bungalow on Sycamore Lane, the kind with wide front porches and creaky hardwood floors that sang under your feet. Every Sunday morning, rain or shine, we'd make pancakes together. Me flipping them too early, her laughing as batter splattered my shirt, then kissing my cheek before wiping it off with her thumb. We had rituals. Friday movie nights with homemade popcorn, Saturday farmers market runs where she'd always buy too many peaches just because they smell like summer, and long walks at dusk where we'd talk about everything and nothing until the streetlights flickered on. When we got married, I promised her I'd never let her feel alone again. And for a while, it seemed like I was keeping that promise. She'd lost her parents young, raised by an aunt who saw affection as indulgence, so she craved warmth like oxygen. I gave her all of mine. I remembered how she cried the first time I said goodnight over the phone just because I missed her voice, how she'd tuck notes into my lunchbox even after I started working from home. She called me her anchor, and I believed her. Then came the pregnancy, or what we both thought was the pregnancy. It started with a missed period, then another. She took 3 tests just to be sure. When they all turned positive, she ran into the living room, waving them like victory flags, tears streaming down her face. I dropped to my knees right there on the rug and pressed my ear to her stomach, even though I knew it was too soon to hear anything. She laughed through her tears and held my head against her. That night, we stayed up until 3 a.m., whispering names, sketching nursery ideas on napkins, dreaming aloud about soccer games and bedtime stories and college funds. She glowed, not just in the cliché way people say pregnant women do, but with a kind of quiet certainty, like she'd finally found the missing piece of herself. I did everything I could to support her. I stocked the fridge with ginger ale and saltines before she even mentioned nausea. I massaged her feet after work, read parenting books during my lunch break, and set up a savings account labeled Baby Evans the very next day. I wanted to be the father I never had, the steady, present kind who shows up with Band-Aids and bedtime songs and unwavering love. But looking back, there were cracks in the porcelain, tiny, almost invisible, but there. She never let me touch her belly after the first month, said it made her too emotional, that she needed to protect the space. At first, I respected it, but then I noticed she flinched whenever my hand drifted near her stomach, even casually. Once, when I reached to hug her from behind, I stiffened so abruptly I thought I'd startled her. "Sorry," she whispered, forcing a smile. "Just sensitive today." And the questions, God, the questions I didn't ask, or worse, the ones I asked and she deflected. "When's your next appointment?" I'd ask, and she'd say,
Oh, not for a while, even though I saw a reminder pop up on her phone. Can I come with you next time? She'd squeeze my hand and say, "You're so sweet, but Dr. Lin likes to keep things low-key for early scans." I didn't know there was a Dr. Lin. I thought our OB was Dr. Patel. She never showed me the ultrasound photos, said the clinic was backlogged on prints, never let me listen to the heartbeat with the Doppler I bought online, always changed the subject when I brought up genetic testing or birthing classes. I told myself I was being paranoid, overeager, that she just wanted to handle things her way. After all, she was carrying our child. Who was I to question her? I thought we were building a future. I didn't know she was burying a secret. I'll never forget the morning of the first ultrasound. I woke up before sunrise, nerves buzzing under my skin like live wires. I'd been counting down the days on my phone calendar. 8 weeks, 6 days, and now it was finally here, the moment we'd see our baby for the first time. I showered extra carefully, shaved twice, and picked out the soft blue sweater she'd once said made my eyes look like the ocean after rain. Corny, maybe, but I wanted everything to feel perfect. I stopped at the flower shop on the corner and bought a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, and tucked a single pink rose in the center. For the little one, I told the florist with a grin that felt too wide for my face. In the car, I recorded a voice memo. Day 62. Today, we meet you. My hands trembled on the steering wheel the whole drive to Westridge Maternity Center. She was already in the waiting room when I arrived, sitting primly in a chair by the window, wearing a loose linen dress that hid her shape entirely. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Still, I handed her the flowers, kissed her forehead, and squeezed her hand. "Ready?" I whispered. She nodded, fingers tightening around mine just a fraction too hard. Inside the exam room, the air smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. The technician, a woman named Carla with silver-streaked hair, greeted us warmly and asked if I wanted to record the scan. "Absolutely," I said, pulling out my phone, hitting record before she'd even turned on the machine. I wanted to capture every second, the first flicker of movement, the tiny flutter of a heartbeat, the shape of a nose or elbow that might one day look like mine. Carla applied the cool gel to my wife's abdomen, then moved the wand slowly across her skin. The screen lit up with grainy gray shapes, shadows and swirls that meant nothing to me but everything to my heart. I leaned forward, breath held, waiting for that magical moment when the image would resolve into life.
But Carla's smile faded. Her brow furrowed slightly. She adjusted the angle, pressed a little harder, then glanced at the nurse standing by the door. The nurse stepped closer, peered at the screen, and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. My stomach dropped. "Everything okay?" I asked, voice tight. Carla forced a smile. "Just getting a clearer view, sweetie. These early scans can be tricky." But her hands were moving faster now, zooming in on certain areas, freezing frames, muttering numbers under her breath. My wife lay perfectly still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't look at the screen once. After 10 agonizing minutes, Carla turned off the machine. "Dr. Evans will be in shortly to go over everything with you," she said, avoiding my gaze as she wiped the gel from my wife's stomach with brisk, efficient strokes. The moment the door closed, I turned to my wife. "What was that about?" She sat up slowly, pulling her dress back down. "I told you, early scans are messy. Don't read into it." But I'd seen the exchange, the silence, the way the nurse had looked at me like I was already a ghost. 20 minutes later, Dr. Evans entered, tall, calm, with the kind of steady presence that usually put people at ease. Today, it only made my pulse race harder. He sat across from us, hands folded, and spoke gently to my wife first. "Everything appears progressing," he said carefully. Then he turned to me. "Could I speak with you for a moment outside?" My wife's eyes flickered, just for a second. Fear? Guilt? Before she nodded politely. "Of course." In the hallway, the cheerful hum of the maternity wing felt suddenly grotesque. Dr. Evans led me a few doors down, far enough that no one could overhear. He didn't waste time. "Mr. Evans," he began, voice low, "what you saw in there, it doesn't align with your wife's reported timeline. Based on fetal development, this pregnancy is at least 12 to 14 weeks along, not 8. I blinked. Maybe she miscalculated. Stress can throw off cycles. He held up a hand. That's not the only discrepancy. He paused, choosing his words like stones on a fragile bridge. The biometric markers, cranial shape, limb proportions, they don't match typical patterns for your ethnic background. And given what I know of your medical history from intake forms, he trailed off, then met my eyes directly. This isn't your child, and that's the least disturbing part. I stood there, the lilies wilting in my memory, the recording still running uselessly in my pocket, as the ground beneath me turned to ash. After that ultrasound, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, Dr. Evans's words echoed like a death knell. This isn't your child, and that's the least disturbing part. I lay beside her in bed, listening to her steady breathing, wondering how someone so familiar could feel like a stranger wrapped in my wife's skin. The next morning, I started replaying everything, every conversation, every glance, every off moment I'd dismissed as stress or fatigue. It began with the timeline. She'd told me her last period was March 12th. We'd started trying right after her birthday on March 20th. But if the baby was already 12 weeks along by May 10th, the day of the scan, that meant conception happened in early February, before her birthday, before we'd even talked about stopping birth control. I remembered now she'd missed a period in January, said it was just stress from work. Then another in February. Hormones, she shrugged, popping an Advil like it was nothing. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She'd never lied to me before. At least, not about anything that mattered. Then there was the morning sickness, or lack thereof. She claimed she vomited every day at 6 a.m. sharp, but I'd woken up countless times to use the bathroom and never once heard her in the bathroom. Once, I'd even peeked into our ensuite at around 5:45 a.m., phone in hand, pretending to check the time. She was lying perfectly still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. When she saw me, she bolted upright and ran to the toilet, dry heaving loudly. It felt staged, rehearsed. And the phone calls, always in the garage, always when I was in the shower or out walking the dog. "It's just my sister," she'd say, but her voice would drop to a whisper, tense and urgent. I'd catch fragments. "No, not yet. He still doesn't know. I can't keep doing this." Once, I came home early from work and found her sitting in the driveway, engine off, phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. When she saw me, she wiped her cheeks fast and smiled. "Traffic was awful," she said, though she hadn't driven anywhere. I started watching, not in a creepy way at first, just noticing. Her calendar was password protected, but one afternoon while she was napping, I tried her old PIN, our anniversary, and it worked. Scrolling back, I found entries labeled only as APT on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the past 3 months. Same time, 2:25 p.m., always downtown, never mentioned. I cross-referenced those dates with my own schedule. Every single one fell on days I worked late or had client dinners. Convenient. Too convenient. One evening, while she was in the shower, I checked her purse. Not out of malice, I told myself, but out of a desperate need to prove I was wrong, to find some mundane explanation that would let me breathe again. Instead, I found a crumpled pharmacy receipt tucked in the side pocket. Prenatal vitamins, purchased February 3rd. February 3rd. We hadn't even discussed having kids until mid-February. Our first real conversation about it happened over wine on Valentine's Day, after she tearfully admitted how much she wanted to be a mother. I remembered because I'd written it in my journal. She cried when I said someday. I promised her someday would be soon. But this receipt predated that conversation by nearly 2 weeks. By then, she'd already been buying prenatal vitamins, already preparing, already living a version of this story before I knew it existed.
I stood in our bedroom, the receipt trembling in my hand, the water still running in the bathroom, steam curling under the door. My chest felt hollow, like someone had reached in and scooped out everything that made me feel safe. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was planning, calculation, a performance so seamless I hadn't seen the strings until they were wrapped around my throat. And the worst part? I still didn't know what she was hiding, or why. All I knew was that the woman I loved had been building a life on a foundation of lies, and I was standing in the rubble, wondering if any of it had ever been real. I met her on the rainiest day of my life, not just weather-wise, but soul-wise. It was 3 weeks after my father's funeral. I'd been walking through downtown like a ghost, hoodie pulled low, hands shoved deep in my pockets, trying to outrun the silence that had settled in our house since he stopped breathing. I hadn't eaten properly in days, hadn't shaved, hadn't spoken more than 10 words to anyone except the cashier at the gas station. And then, there she was, standing under the awning of that little bookstore on Elm Street, struggling to open a stubborn umbrella with one hand while holding a stack of paperbacks in the other. Rain soaked through her sweater, darkening it to navy, and when she finally gave up and laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that cut through the gray afternoon, I swear something inside me unclenched for the first time in months.
She saw me staring and smiled. "You look like you could use a dry spot," she said, stepping aside to make room. I mumbled thanks and stood beside her, close enough to smell the lavender shampoo in her hair, far enough not to invade her space. We didn't talk at first, just watched the rain sheet down the street, turning sidewalks into rivers. Then she asked, soft as breath, "Bad day?" I almost walked away, but something in her eyes, the lack of pity, the quiet understanding, made me stay. "My dad died," I said, and just like that, the dam broke. I told her about the hospice bed in the living room, about how I still set a place for him at dinner out of habit, about how empty the world felt without his voice in it. She didn't offer platitudes, didn't say he's in a better place. She just listened. Then, when the rain slowed to a drizzle, she handed me one of her books, The Language of Flowers, and said, "He loved you. That doesn't end just because he's gone." We had coffee that day, then dinner the next. Within a month, she was sleeping over. Within 6, she moved in. She didn't fix me. No one can do that. But she made the broken parts feel less sharp. She remembered how I took my coffee, black, 1 sugar, knew when I needed silence versus a hug, and never once flinched when I woke up crying from dreams where I couldn't find him. When I proposed 2 years later, I did it on that same bookstore awning, on a rainy afternoon just like the first. She said yes before I even finished the question, tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. "You were my shelter when I didn't know I was drowning," she whispered. Back then, I believed in fate, in second chances, in love as redemption. Now, standing in our kitchen with that pharmacy receipt burning a hole in my pocket, I replayed every tender moment like evidence in a trial. The way she'd held me after nightmares, the way she'd whispered, "You're enough," when I doubted myself, the way she'd promised over and over, "I'll never leave you." I'd given her everything, my grief, my trust, my future, when I had nothing left to give. And she'd taken it all, wrapped it in silk, and used it to build a stage for a lie so elaborate it made my stomach churn. I trusted her with my broken pieces. I never imagined she'd use them as camouflage. I waited until dinner was over, until the dishes were rinsed, the candles blown out, and the soft jazz playlist she loved hummed through the speakers like a lullaby for the life we'd built. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, hands folded to keep them from shaking, and said, as gently as I could, "Can we talk about the ultrasound?" She didn't look up, just traced the rim of her wine glass with one finger. "What about it? Dr. Evans said everything's fine." "He didn't," I said quietly. "He pulled me aside. He told me the pregnancy is further along than you said, and that the baby doesn't match my genetic markers." For a heartbeat, nothing. Then she laughed, a short, brittle sound that didn't belong in our warm kitchen. "Oh, come on. You're not seriously believing some stranger over me, are you?" She finally met my eyes, and they were wide with what looked like genuine hurt. "After everything we've been through, you think I'd lie about something like this?" "I don't want to think that,"
I said, voice cracking. But the dates don't add up. The vitamins, February 3rd, Elena. We hadn't even talked about trying yet. Her expression flickered, just for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. A shadow passing behind her eyes, like someone closing a door fast before you can see what's inside. Then it was gone, replaced with wounded disbelief. "Is this about jealousy?" she asked, voice trembling now. "Because I got pregnant and you didn't? Because your body works fine but mine needed help? Is that it?" Tears welled up, spilling over before she could stop them. "I went through hell to give us this chance. Hormone shots, midnight ultrasounds, crying in clinic bathrooms, and you're sitting here accusing me of faking it?" Her words hit like stones, because part of me had wondered if infertility had twisted into resentment, if maybe deep down I resented her for carrying what I couldn't create. But that wasn't why I was asking. That wasn't what was scaring me. "I'm not jealous," I said, leaning forward. "I'm terrified. Terrified that I don't know you anymore. That the woman who held me after my dad died, the one who promised she'd never leave, is hiding something so big it made a doctor tell me to walk away." That's when her face changed. The tears stopped. Her jaw tightened. The warmth vanished, replaced with something cold and sharp. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, each word precise, deliberate. "And if you love me, if you truly love me, you'll drop this right now, before you ruin everything." The finality in her voice chilled me more than any accusation. It wasn't denial. It was a warning. "But what if I can't?" I whispered. "What if I need to know the truth even if it destroys us?" She stood abruptly, chair scraping against hardwood. "Then maybe you never really loved me," she said, and walked out of the room. I sat there for an hour, staring at the empty chair, replaying every syllable, every micro-expression. Had I imagined the flicker? Was grief making me paranoid? Maybe the doctor misread the scan. Maybe the receipt was for a friend. Maybe I was the unstable one, unraveling under the pressure of impending fatherhood. But then I remembered the way she never let me touch her stomach, the secret appointments, the rehearsed vomiting, the fact that she'd never once shown me any single ultrasound image. No, this wasn't paranoia. This was pattern. Later that night, I found my pillow and blanket folded neatly at the foot of the couch. No note, no explanation, just silence. I lay down, staring at the ceiling, the house too quiet without her breathing beside me. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping across the walls like searchlights. And in that darkness, with the ghost of our future crumbling around me, I asked myself the question that would haunt me for weeks. Am I losing my mind or my wife? 3 days after the confrontation, I couldn't take the silence anymore. Elena barely spoke to me. Meals were eaten in separate rooms, conversations reduced to logistical exchanges about bills and trash day. She'd started sleeping with her back to me again, even when I crept back into the bedroom out of sheer exhaustion. But it wasn't just distance, it was performance. Every smile felt rehearsed. Every good morning sounded like a line from a script she hadn't fully memorized. I needed proof, not for her, but for me, to know I wasn't inventing monsters in the dark. So I called Dr. Evans, not from my phone, from a burner I bought at the gas station on Oak Street, hands sweating as I dialed the clinic's main line. When his assistant answered, I used a fake name, Mark Reddles, and claimed to be a close family friend helping Elena with insurance paperwork. It was flimsy, but desperation makes you bold. To my shock, Dr. Evans agreed to speak with me. Not over the phone, though. He insisted on an in-person meeting after hours at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the clinic. "I don't do this lightly," he said when we sat down in a dim corner booth, rain tapping against the window. But what I saw, it goes beyond medical irregularity. He didn't mince words. Based on crown rump length, limb development, and placental maturity, the fetus is between 14 and 15 weeks gestational age. Your wife reported conception in late March. That timeline is medically impossible. I nodded, throat tight. And the genetic markers? He hesitated, stirring his black coffee absently. The craniofacial proportions, nasal bone density, even subtle pigment indicators, they align more closely with Mediterranean or North African ancestry. You listed your background as Irish and German on intake forms. There's no biological match.
I closed my eyes. The room tilted slightly. "So it's not mine?" "It's not yours," he confirmed quietly. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "But that's not all. He told me something that made my blood run colder than any lies she'd told so far. During the scan, I noticed uterine scarring consistent with prior pregnancies, 2, possibly 3. I cross-referenced our internal records under her legal name, nothing. But out of caution, I ran a broader search using her date of birth and social. That's when I found them. He paused, watching me carefully. 2 pregnancy terminations in the last 18 months. One at Cedar Memorial, another at St. Luke's West, both registered under different names, Lena Carter and Elena Moore. Same date of birth, same address, yours. My breath stopped. She was pregnant before? Twice? And terminated both, he said. No follow-up appointments, no counseling referrals, just in-and-out procedures, paid in cash. The kind people do when they don't want a paper trail. I stared at my hands. My wedding band suddenly felt heavy, foreign. All this time, I thought we were trying for our first child together, but she'd been pregnant, twice, without telling me, and ended both pregnancies in secret, under aliases, while I held her hand through false alarms and stress cycles. Why? If she wanted a baby so badly, why terminate? Unless those pregnancies weren't hers to keep, unless they were part of a pattern I still couldn't see. Dr. Evans placed a hand on my arm. I'm telling you this because I've seen cases like this before, not often, but enough. Sometimes the desire for motherhood becomes entangled with something deeper, trauma, identity loss, even psychological conditions like pseudocyesis or factitious disorder. I don't know what's driving her, but this isn't just deception. It's distress wearing a disguise. He gave me his card. If you need support, legal, therapeutic, emotional, call me. Don't face this alone. I walked home in the rain, not caring that I was soaked. The streets blurred around me, sounds muffled as if underwater. When I got inside, Elena was in the living room, folding laundry, humming softly, the same tune she'd hummed the day we met. I watched her from the doorway, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the gentle curve of her wrist as she smoothed a shirt. The woman I'd built my life around, the woman who'd cried at funerals, nursed me through flu season, whispered, "You're my home" on our wedding night. And now I knew she'd carried other lives inside her, ended them in silence, then come home to me and pretended we were starting fresh. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were hollow, haunted. Slowly, I twisted off my wedding ring and held it in my palm, the gold warm from my skin. Outside, she called my name, soft, concerned. "You okay in there?" I didn't answer. I just looked down at the ring, this tiny circle that once meant forever, and whispered the only question left. "Who even are you?" After that night, something in me broke open, not with rage, but with a cold, relentless clarity. I couldn't live in the fog anymore. So I did what felt unthinkable. I hired a private investigator. His name was Ray Delgado, a former cop with tired eyes and a voice like gravel. "I don't do divorce work," he said when I called, "but if you're worried about your safety, or hers, I'll look." I told him everything. The fake pregnancies, the aliases, the doctor's warning. He agreed to take the case. Within a week, Ray had footage of Elena meeting a man at a diner downtown, same man she'd spoken to on those hushed garage calls. Not romantic, Ray noted, but tense, transactional. She handed him an envelope, he gave her a folder. They didn't touch, didn't smile, just nodded and walked away in opposite directions. When I showed the photo to my best friend, Mark, he sighed and rubbed his temples. "Dude, maybe she's just stressed. Maybe she's seeing a therapist off the books. You're spiraling." Even Sarah, my sister, the only one who'd always hated how perfect Elena seemed, urged caution. "Be sure before you burn it all down. Once you accuse someone of this, there's no coming back." My mother was worse. Over Sunday dinner, chicken pot pie, her specialty, she set down her fork with a clink and said, "You've got a beautiful wife who wants to give you a child. Don't ruin a good thing chasing ghosts." Her eyes were sharp, judgmental. "Men your age get restless. Maybe you're scared of being a father. Maybe you're looking for an out."
I left without finishing my plate. At home, Elena had changed. The warmth was gone. She spoke in clipped sentences, moved through the house like a tenant, not a partner. One evening, I found her in the bedroom folding clothes into a duffel bag. "Just in case," she said, not looking up, "if things get complicated." "Complicated how?" I pressed. She zipped the bag shut. "You're making them complicated." The distance between us became a chasm. We ate separately, slept in separate rooms, passed each other in hallways like strangers sharing an apartment. But I kept digging. Ray discovered she'd opened a post office under Elena Moore, the same alias from St. Luke's. Then, buried in a stack of old utility bills I found while cleaning out the garage, I spotted a lease agreement for a storage unit at You Keep Safe on Route 9. Monthly payment $78, signed 3 months ago, in cash. The address was only 10 minutes from our house. I waited until she left for one of her mysterious appointments. Told myself I was crossing a line, but what line was left when the foundation was already ash? I drove to the storage facility, heart pounding, and used the spare key she kept of her key ring, the only one I'd copied weeks earlier without her knowing. Unit 14B was small, climate-controlled. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed like a verdict. Inside, it wasn't documents or secret letters I found. It was a nursery. Not for a newborn, for a toddler. Tiny jeans folded neatly on a shelf, a row of miniature sneakers, red, blue, yellow, lined up like soldiers, a stuffed elephant with one ear chewed soft, a stack of board books, Goodnight Moon, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, Where's Spot, all worn at the edges as if read nightly. And in the center of the unit, hanging from a portable rack, were children's outfits, a dinosaur hoodie, a pink raincoat with duck boots, a tiny baseball cap with Daddy's MVP stitched in white thread. My knees buckled. This wasn't preparation for a future child. This was mourning a past one, or rehearsing for a role. Because none of it made sense. If she'd never been pregnant with my child, if the current pregnancy was a fabrication, then who were these clothes for? And why did they look so loved, so lived in? I picked up the baseball cap, fingers trembling. It smelled faintly of baby shampoo and lavender detergent, the same brand Elena used. On the inside tag, someone had written in delicate script, "For Leo, always." Leo. We'd never picked a name, not officially, but once during one of our late-night dreaming sessions, I'd said, if it's a boy, I kind of like Leo. She'd smiled and tucked the name away like a treasure. Now it was stitched on a hat in a storage unit full of lies. I sank to the floor, surrounded by tiny shoes and phantom laughter, and realized with chilling certainty this wasn't just deception, it's delusion wearing the skin of devotion, and I had no idea how deep it went or how to wake her up without destroying us both. I sat in the storage unit for over an hour, surrounded by those tiny clothes, feeling like I was drowning in someone else's dream. The weight of it all, the lies, the aliases, the phantom child Leo, pressed down until I couldn't breathe. Part of me wanted to drive away, just get in the car, keep going, and never look back. What was left to salvage? A marriage built on performance? A future scripted in someone else's handwriting?
That afternoon, I found myself at Oak Hill Cemetery, standing before my father's headstone. Rain had started again, soft and persistent, soaking through my jacket as I knelt in the wet grass. I hadn't visited in months, too busy building a life I thought would make him proud. "I don't know what to do, Dad," I whispered, voice cracking. I loved her so completely, gave her everything when I had nothing, and now I don't even know if any of it was real. Tears mixed with rain on my face. I feel ashamed for not seeing it, for still loving her, for wanting to run. Am I weak for staying or cruel for leaving? I stayed until my knees ached and the light faded. There was no answer from the stone, no sign from the sky, just silence. And in that silence, I made a decision. I'd leave. Not tonight, not dramatically, but soon, quietly, before this lie swallowed whatever truth was left in me. I got home just after 8, exhausted, ready to pack my own bag. The house was dark. Elena's car wasn't in the driveway. I poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the blank wall where we'd once pinned nursery color swatches. Then my phone rang. It was her office manager. "She collapsed at her desk," the woman said, voice tight with panic. "They're taking her to Westridge ER. She kept saying your name." I was there in 12 minutes. The ER waiting room buzzed with the usual chaos, crying children, harried nurses, beeping monitors. But the moment I gave Elena's name at the front desk, everything changed. A nurse appeared instantly, ushering me past triage. "Room 4, she said gently. "She's stable but shaken." As I walked down the hall, I passed 2 more nurses who glanced at me, then exchanged knowing looks. One murmured to the other, "Poor thing, she's been through so much with the other losses." I stopped cold. Other losses. Not this pregnancy, not the baby. Other losses. Plural. Past tense. My blood turned to ice. In the exam room, Elena lay pale under a thin blanket, an IV in her arm, eyes closed. She looked fragile, smaller than I remembered. When she saw me, she reached out weakly. "You came," she whispered. I didn't take her hand. Not yet. Instead, I stood by the bed, watching her face, searching for the woman I married and the stranger who'd built a shrine to a child who never existed. The nurse returned with paperwork. As she handed it to me, she added softly, "We've updated her file to reflect her history. Dr. Evans flagged it last time, but now that she's back," she trailed off, then patted my shoulder. "You've been so patient with her. Most men wouldn't stick around after everything." After everything. I nodded numbly, but inside my mind was racing. They knew. The hospital staff knew. Not just about this fake pregnancy, but the others, the terminations, the collapses, the pattern. This wasn't a single deception, it was a cycle, a ritual, a grief she couldn't release, so she kept reenacting it over and over, wrapping new lies around old wounds until no one, not even herself, could tell where the pain ended and the performance began. And I'd walked right into the middle of it, thinking I was building a family. Now, standing in that sterile room, watching her drift in and out of consciousness, I finally understood. This isn't just one secret, it's a pattern. I stayed by Elena's bedside most of the night, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, my mind a storm of questions with no safe harbor. Around 3 a.m., a nurse named Diane came in to check her vitals. She was older, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes that held the kind of quiet wisdom you only get from holding people's worst moments in your hands. She didn't say much at first, just adjusted the IV, checked the monitor, smoothed the blanket over Elena's shoulders. But as she turned to leave, she paused at the door and looked back at me, really looked, not with pity, but with recognition. "You've got that look," she said softly, "the one that says you're trying to love someone while drowning in their secrets." I didn't answer. I just stared at my hands. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I've seen her before. Not just here. At Mercy General 2 years ago, she came in bleeding, claiming a miscarriage at 10 weeks. Then again last year at St. Luke's West. Same story, same grief, different name each time." My head snapped up. "You knew?" Diane sighed, glancing down the hall before continuing. "We don't talk about it. Patient confidentiality, even when things feel off. But after the 3rd time, some of us started connecting dots." She hesitated, then added, "She always comes alone, always pays cash, always leaves before anyone can follow up." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, voice raw. "Because you look like you're carrying the whole world," she said gently, "and because I think she needs help, not judgment, but you can't give her that if you don't understand what you're dealing with." Then she did something that stunned me. She reached into her scrubs pocket and handed me a folded slip of paper. "Dr. Miriam Lynn. She's a psychiatrist who specializes in perinatal trauma and identity disorders. Elena saw her briefly 5 years ago, before you two met. Records show she went after her mother's death. Dr. Lynn tried to refer her for long-term care, but Elena never went back." I unfolded the paper.
a name, a phone number, an address downtown. She might not talk to you, Diane warned, but if anyone knows what's really going on inside that woman's heart, it's her. After she left, I sat in the dim glow of the heart monitor, turning the slip of paper over in my fingers like a lifeline. For months, I'd been chasing clues, demanding truth, preparing to walk away. But what if the truth wasn't malice, but pain so deep that it twisted into fiction? What if she wasn't trying to hurt me, but to survive? Outside, the sky began to lighten, a pale gray bleeding into dawn. Elena stirred, murmuring something intelligible. I didn't move towards her, not yet. Instead, I stood, walked quietly into the hallway, and dialed the number on the paper. It rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. Dr. Lin's office.
I took a breath, my hand shaking slightly, and spoke the words I never imagined I'd say. I need to make an appointment. It's about my wife. Dr. Lin's office was nothing like I expected. No sterile white walls or ticking clocks, just warm wood shelves lined with books on trauma, grief, and the fragile architecture of the human mind. She was in her 60s, with kind eyes and a voice that didn't rush, even when the truth was heavy. I told her everything. The ultrasounds, the aliases, the storage unit full of toddler clothes, the hospital visits under false names. She listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. When I finished, she leaned back and said quietly, "Your wife isn't lying to hurt you. She's lying to survive." Then she explained. Elena suffers from pseudocyesis, a rare psychological condition where a woman believes she's pregnant so completely that her body mimics all the physical signs: missed periods, weight gain, even labor pains. It's not faking. It's a profound mind-body delusion, often rooted in deep emotional need or unresolved trauma. But in Elena's case, it's layered with something more complex: pathological lying intertwined with identity fragmentation. Dr. Lin pulled out an old file, redacted, but enough to confirm what Diane had hinted at. After her mother's death, Elena discovered journals revealing that her mother had suffered multiple miscarriages in secret, shamed into silence by her own family for failing as a woman. One entry read, "If I can't give him a child, I'm nothing." Elena internalized that message like scripture. "She's not just trying to be a mother," Dr. Lin said gently. "She's trying to rewrite her mother's story and her own worth through pregnancy. Every loss becomes a performance of devotion, every fake scan a ritual to prove she's still worthy of love." I sat there, stunned. All this time, I'd seen betrayal, but what if I'd been witnessing grief in disguise? "There's also evidence of reenactment behavior," Dr. Lin continued. "The name Leo, was that meaningful to you?" I nodded. I mentioned it once, offhand. "She's using your hopes as scaffolding for her fantasy," Dr. Lin said. "It's not about deception, it's about connection, even if it's built on sand." For the first time, I didn't feel rage. I felt sorrow, not just for me, but for her, for the little girl who watched her mother disappear into shame, for the woman who thought the only way to keep love was to manufacture a miracle. "I could walk away," I said quietly. "Legally, emotionally, I'd be justified." "You would," Dr. Lin agreed. "But ask yourself, do you want to be right or do you want to understand?" That question stayed with me all the way home. I didn't go straight inside. Instead, I stopped at the bookstore where we'd met, the same one under the awning on Elm Street. I bought 2 leather-bound journals, simple, unlined. Back in the car, I labeled them with a silver pen. The first, facts, for dates, records, sessions, truths, however painful. A place to anchor myself so I wouldn't drown in her illusions. The second, forgiveness. Not absolution, not yet, but space for questions, for grief, for the slow, messy work of deciding whether love can coexist with truth. I placed both on the passenger seat, then started the engine. The rain had returned, soft and steady, washing the windshield clean. I wasn't running anymore. I was preparing, not for battle, but for understanding, and maybe, just maybe, for healing. I waited until evening,
until the house was quiet, the dishes done, the last of the rain tapping gently against the windows like a lullaby for broken things. Elena was on the couch, wrapped in the quilt her grandmother had made, staring at a cooking show with unseeing eyes. She hadn't asked about my day, hadn't mentioned the hospital. We'd been orbiting each other like ghosts in our own home. I sat beside her, not too close, not too far, and took a breath that felt like it came from the bottom of the ocean. "I met with Dr. Lin today," I said softly. She stiffened instantly, fingers tightening around the edge of the quilt. "You had no right." "I didn't go to expose you. I went because I couldn't love you if I didn't understand you." Silence stretched between us, thick and fragile. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping across the wall like searchlights over wreckage. "I know about your mother," I continued, voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I know what she went through, the shame, the silence, how she believed her worth depended on giving someone a child." Elena's breath hitched. She didn't look at me. "I know you've never been pregnant, not with me, not with anyone, not in the way that matters. The ultrasounds, they were fakes. Old scans you found online, edited to look real. The appointments, the vitamins, the morning sickness, it was all part of the story you needed to tell yourself, and me." She turned then, eyes wide, wet with panic. "You think I'm crazy." "No," I said firmly. "I think you're hurting, and you've been hurting for so long you started building a world where the pain made sense." That's when the dam broke. A sob tore from her throat, raw, guttural, the kind that comes from a place deeper than words. She curled into herself, shoulders shaking, face buried in her hands. "I tried," she whispered, voice muffled. "I tried so hard to get pregnant. After Mark left, he said I was broken, that I'd never be a real woman if I couldn't give him a child." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And then I met you. You were so kind, so patient. You held me when I cried about my mom. You said you'd love me no matter what." Her voice cracked. "But I didn't believe you. How could you love me if I couldn't give you what every man wants, what every family needs?" I stayed silent, letting her speak. "So I found a scan online, a 14-week boy. I printed it, put it on the fridge, and when you smiled at it like it was real, I couldn't stop." She wiped her face with trembling hands. "I thought if I gave you a baby, you'd never leave me." The words landed like stones in my chest, not because they excused the lies, but because they revealed the wound beneath them. This wasn't manipulation, it was desperation dressed as devotion, a cry for safety wrapped in a nursery full of phantom clothes. Rage surged in me, hot, righteous. How dare she rewrite our life? How dare she make me complicit in a fantasy while I mourned a child who never existed? But beneath the anger was something heavier, pity, grief, for the years of shame she carried alone, for the way trauma taught her that love is conditional, that she must perform motherhood to be worthy of it.
I wanted to walk away, to say, "This is too much. I can't carry this." But then I remembered her at the bookstore awning, handing me a book because she saw my loneliness before I even named it. I remembered her holding me after my father died, saying nothing, just being there. Even if that version of her was tangled in illusion, the care behind it had been real. Maybe not consistent, maybe not healthy, but real. Slowly, I reached out. Not to touch her belly, never that again, but to take her hand. Her skin was cold. She flinched, then let me hold it. "I'm not leaving," I said, voice rough with emotion. "Not tonight. But we can't keep living in a lie, Elena. Not even a beautiful one." She collapsed against me then, sobbing into my shoulder, body trembling like a leaf in a storm. I held her, not as a husband who'd been betrayed, not as a man who'd lost a future, but as someone who finally saw the truth. She wasn't trying to destroy us. She was trying to save herself from a lifetime of feeling unworthy. And in that moment, torn between rage and pity, between the man I was and the man I wanted to be, I chose to stay, not for the baby that never was, but for the woman who still might be. Therapy didn't fix us overnight. It didn't erase the storage unit full of toddler clothes or the fake ultrasound images still saved in her cloud folder. But it gave us a language for the silence that had grown between us like ivy, beautiful from afar, suffocating up close. We started with Dr. Lin separately, then cautiously together. The first joint session was brutal. Elena sat curled in on herself, arms crossed, as if bracing for judgment. I sat rigid, rehearsing my grievances like armor. But Dr. Lin didn't let us hide behind blame. "This isn't about who lied," she said gently. "It's about why the truth felt too dangerous to speak." And slowly, painfully, the real story emerged. Elena confessed she'd tried IVF 3 times before we even met, paid for with savings from her first job, hidden from everyone, including her aunt. All 3 cycles failed. The last one left her with ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, hospitalized for days alone. "She felt like my body was betraying me," she whispered during one session, eyes fixed on the floor. "Like I was defective, unlovable." And when Mark left, he said, "Maybe you're just not meant to be a mother." I believed him. She never told me because she was terrified I'd see her the same way, that I'd look at her and see lack instead of love. And I had to face my own part. In a raw, trembling admission, I told her how much I'd tied my identity to becoming a father. How, after watching my dad raise me alone, I'd promised myself I'd build something whole, a family where no one felt abandoned. "I thought if I could give you a child," I said, voice breaking, "I'd prove I wasn't broken like I sometimes feel, that I was enough." We'd both been performing versions of ourselves we thought the other needed. Her as the fertile nurturer, me as the steadfast provider, while hiding our deepest fears in the shadows between us. There was no grand reconciliation, no sudden return to the life we'd imagined. Instead, we made a different kind of promise: to pause. Not to end the marriage, but to stop pretending, to give ourselves space to heal without the pressure of roles we couldn't fulfill. We agreed to live separately for 6 months, me in my childhood home, which my mom had finally emptied, Elena in a small apartment near her therapist. We'd meet weekly for sessions, talk daily by phone, but no expectations beyond honesty. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, choosing uncertainty over illusion. But for the first time, I felt like I was seeing her clearly, not as the woman who'd betrayed me, but as the one who'd been drowning in shame so long she mistook deception for survival. One evening, back in my quiet house, I opened the journal labeled Facts, flipped past dates, clinic names, aliases. Then I turned to a fresh page in the other journal, the one titled Forgiveness. I wrote, "Today, she told me about the 3rd IVF cycle, how she sat in the parking lot afterward and screamed into her steering wheel until her throat bled, how she never told anyone because she thought grief without a body to bury wasn't real grief." 6 months later, the leaves had turned gold and begun to fall, and I found myself standing outside a 3rd-floor apartment on Maple Avenue, the kind of building with mismatched curtains and potted geraniums on every sill. Elena's new place. Not grand, not permanent, but hers. Clean, quiet, real. I hadn't come to fix anything, not to beg her back or demand closure. I'd come to return something. Her copy of The Language of Flowers, the book she'd handed me under the bookstore awning all those years ago. I'd kept it on my nightstand through every storm, its pages dog-eared and stained with coffee rings. But it was hers, and some things, even the most meaningful, need to be given back before you can move forward. She opened the door before I could knock. She looked different, not thinner or older exactly, but softer around the edges, like someone who'd finally stopped bracing for impact. Her hair was shorter, pulled back in a loose clip. No makeup, just her. "Hi," she said, voice steady. "Hi." I held out the book. "I thought you might want this back." She took it slowly,
fingers brushing mine. No spark, no tension, just the quiet recognition of two people who'd shared a lifetime in a few short years. "You kept it all this time?" "I did." She stepped aside. "Want coffee? I've got that dark roast you like." I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, coffee would be good." Her apartment was sparse but warm. A small couch, a bookshelf filled with therapy workbooks and novels, a single framed photo on the wall. Her mother, young and smiling, holding a bouquet of lilies. No baby clothes, no ultrasound prints. Just space, room to breathe. We sat at her kitchen table, steam curling from our mugs. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. The weather, a new bakery downtown, how her aunt had finally started calling again. Then, carefully, we moved deeper. She told me about her intensive therapy, how she was learning to separate her worth from her womb, how she joined a group for women with reproductive trauma. "It's hard," she admitted, stirring her coffee absently. "Some days I still feel like a ghost in my own life, but now I don't have to haunt someone else's dreams to feel real." I told her about my support group, men like me, partners of people wrestling with invisible battles. I used to think love meant fixing. Now I know it sometimes just means staying nearby while they find their own way. There were no declarations, no maybe someday. We didn't hold hands, didn't lean in, but there was something rarer than romance in that room. Honesty without armor. Before she left, she walked me to the door. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not hating me. I never hated you. I just didn't know how to love you through the fog." She smiled, a real one this time, small but unguarded. "I'm glad you're okay." "I'm getting there." Outside, the afternoon sun slanted through the trees, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I walked to my car slowly, the weight in my chest lighter than it had been in years. Not because everything was fixed, because I no longer needed it to be. I wasn't carrying her secrets anymore. I wasn't mourning a child who never existed. I wasn't trying to be the hero of a story that wasn't mine to tell. For the first time in a long time, I was just me, and that was enough. Sometimes the darkest secrets aren't meant to destroy us. They're cries for help wrapped in lies. I used to think love was about building a perfect future together. Now I know it's about having the courage to face an imperfect truth and choosing whether to walk through it side by side or apart, but always with eyes open. If you thought this story was shocking, wait until you hear what happened when my sister showed up at my door with a DNA test and a child who looked exactly like me. Have you ever stayed for someone who wasn't who you thought they were? Or walked away because you finally saw them clearly? Share your story below. Your words might be the lifeline someone else needs tonight.